Throughout history, men, on average, have earned more money than women. While this fact may not be questioned, the reasons for this disparity certainly have. By looking at various sources, including accounts from professors of history and economics, journal articles, and interviews, it appears that one of the factors that can be discarded from the outset, despite being synonymous with differences in income, is employer discrimination. As discrimination is deemed illegal via the Equality Act, employers would have to find good reason for any unfair treatment. When we take the various factors into account, including length of shifts, accumulated hours, and consistent employment, compared to those taking a career break prioritizing the birth and rearing of children for the first 5 to 6 years of their lives, then male-female economic differences are minimized. If we focus on academia, going back to the 1970s, cross-culturally, women who were not just single but had never been married, on average, would earn higher salaries than men who had never tied the knot. Women in this category were also granted tenure more often than their male counterparts. And in society at large, women who had returned to full-time employment and worked consistently after taking a break to have children typically earned higher incomes than men who were working continuously. So it seems that rather than attributing it to employer discrimination, the choices men and women make are driven by lifestyle choices, biological considerations, as well as differences in both personality and interest. It has become quite popular to ascribe the increase in female employment rate to the Equal Pay Act of 1970 and the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975, both of which were an apparent consequence of the feminist movement. The birth control pill via the NHS and the Abortion Act were both approved in 1967. However, the data suggests that a bigger determinant of female employment is the fluctuations in the age at which women get married and have children. Proponents of the discrimination narrative claim that the reason the number of women in full-time employment fell after the First World War was because the returning soldiers reclaimed their old jobs at the expense of the women. And while there is an element of truth there, the bigger causal factor is that there was a spike in birth rates. There was a similar scenario after the Second World War, during the baby boom, when marriages and births peaked again, thus resulting in less women in the workplace. Consequently, by the start of the 1950s, the proportion of women in employment had returned to the similar pre-war rate. Conversely, as the age at which women would get married started to rise and the birth rate dropped, the number of women in the workplace began to rise. So as the 1970s came to a close, a new trend was setting, with over half the women of working age now being employed in service industries and healthcare, rather than being confined to the home. The opposite narrative, whereby this rise is due to anti-discrimination laws and the rise of feminism, is only really viable if you just start from the decade of the 1970s and discard the trends that preceded it. As financial consequences are due to what has actually happened opposed to what hypothetically happened, gender differences produce an uneven balance with regard to attitudes towards work and the family. And as men can't give birth, to expect an equal share in both domestic responsibilities as well as income is illogical. As a result, there are similar gender disparities regarding the type of jobs that men and women favor. Women planning a 5 to 6 year career break are typically deterred from an occupation in which the rules and parameters are constantly changing. A computer scientist today will be working in a completely new environment than someone with the same job title 5 years ago. Whereas librarians, nurses, and teachers would not have to make as many adjustments on their return. Similarly, there is a gender pay gap among newly graduated physicians, with males earning more, which superficially may appear unfair. However, if you scrutinize the data, it becomes apparent why. Per year, the males are working, on average, 500 hours more than the females. So, if anyone puts in that amount of work in comparison to their colleague, you wouldn't expect anything but a pay disparity. It therefore appears that lifestyle choices, child-rearing and marriage have a bigger say in the pay gap than the rise in feminism or discrimination in the workplace. If anything, employers now tend to favor positive discrimination under the guise of positive action or affirmative action. But positive discrimination is still discrimination. The solution to discrimination is not to discriminate, just as the solution to racism is not to be racist.